Hey everyone, and welcome to the Cathy Reisenwitz Show. I am Cathy Reisenwitz, and I have with me today Christina Parreira. She is an active sex worker. She works at a Nevada brothel. She also has cam work and porn and stripping in her past, and so often we talk about sex workers, and so little we actually talk to people who are active in the industry, who have firsthand experience with what's going on in this world. And the pros and cons to legalization and decriminalization, and whether criminalization is working. I wanted to get her thoughts on that. I also wanted to get her thoughts on the latest FBI raids, which have rescued underage human trafficking victims, and then on a controversy that she wrote about pretty recently concerning a human trafficking rescuer named Chong Kim, whose story has a few holes in it. So Christina, thank you so much for joining us today. You're also pursuing your PhD right now. What are you studying?
I am. Right now, I actually just completed the first year of my PhD in sociology at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So I'm right here in, Sin City, in the middle of it, studying. And then the legal brothel work actually came, believe it or not, as part of or as a decision to do research and collect data from real sex workers in the brothel. And so, yeah, I'm working with some really fantastic prostitution researchers over at UNLV.
That's awesome. I'm so excited about that. So tell me.
I am too.
Tell me what your take is on the decrim versus legalization aspect of the debate.
So I'll try to keep it short because I could probably go on for hours. But for starters, I always like to inform people that I think the way the word decrim or decriminalization is being used in sex worker circles is not the way, I don't think is the way most people intend it to be used. And so when I think of decriminalization, and of course in the criminology sense, it's something obviously that is no longer criminalized, but could still have some penalties attached to it. So we see this with marijuana, for example. That's always the one example that I turn to is there may no longer be criminal sanctions, but there might still be a fine or a ticket. That's in the criminological sense what true decrim is. And so I'm not for that. I'm for full legalization. But for the purposes of not confusing people, for whatever reason in sex worker camps, the words we use are decrim versus legalization versus, of course, criminalization, which is the current state in the U.S. other than very few counties where I live in Nevada. But anyways, if I were to use the lingo that most people are familiar with, I am pro decriminalization, because I do not agree with the overregulation that comes with the current legal model. And although I work at a legal brothel and I enjoy my work and I can speak to that, in my ideal world, my ideal world would be New Zealand. I think New Zealand has probably got the closest model to what I would want to see all over the world. So, and I'll go a little more into that just for those that don't know. I believe it was 2003 they removed all the criminal penalties off of prostitution in New Zealand. And so there, for example, a worker can do street work, indoor work, escorting, brothel work. They can work for a licensed brothel. They can do all of that, and it's all legal. There's no, as far as I know, I could be wrong on this, but as far as I know, there's no criminal penalties or fines or sanctions against sex work in New Zealand. So that to me would be whatever you want to call it, full legalization / decriminalization, and that would be the model that I would love to see everywhere.
No, it seems to me.
Although I don't think that's realistic, but that's probably not my lifetime, but maybe one day.
I don't know. It seems like it's definitely getting in the news. I mean, people are considering it, especially with the human trafficking scare. But I want to talk about how how do we extend, I guess, what I would call as a libertarian property rights to sex workers in anything short of legalization? So, for example, in New Zealand, even though sex workers aren't criminalized for doing their jobs, if they're assaulted in the line of their work or robbed, if they call the police, is that going to be a pleasant interaction? Are they going to be treated like somebody who gets robbed working at a convenience store, or are they still kind of second-class citizens?
Well, I can't speak as well to that in New Zealand. I believe since it is legal, unlike here in the U.S., the workers would be afforded legal protections. Now, is that to say they're still going to be treated like human beings? That's a whole different story, and that could depend on the cop. It could depend on whoever answers the call. Unfortunately, regardless of what the legislation and the laws say, there is still, I refer to it as horse stigma, but there is still a stigma of, Tufa, stop, sorry, my dog is, come here. There is still a stigma of people that sell sex and sexual services. And so, I'm registered as a prostitute, for example, in Nevada. And now I have a card that actually says brothel worker on it. And so if I get pulled over for, anything, a traffic ticket, I suspect that if a cop runs my information, he's going to see that I'm a prostitute. Now, that concerns me because even though I am working legally, as those in New Zealand, that cop might have something against sex workers, or, you never know. People have these old ways of thinking and their morality, and of course that's a whole discussion in itself. But I think that that's part of the core problem, besides for the legislation, is how law enforcement and how people and society in general still view sex workers as inherently dirty.
How do you propose we go about fighting, I call it whorephobia, but that stigmatization of making how I describe it is sex workers make the economics of sex explicit, and that makes people really uncomfortable. How do we fight that?
I like the way you put that too. It's true. It really puts it out there with there's no BS, there's no frills, there's no, oh, well, you have to take me out to this kind of restaurant to get the goods, it puts a real price tag on it. And I think you're right. I think that really terrifies a lot of people, and dare I say, a lot of women, and I know I'm going to get, flack for that, but I think it concerns people because it makes the access to sex and to cheating, as, it is mostly male clients in the brothels. It makes it really easy, and I think that scares people. And now the way how to get past that, I think, that's a big undertaking. But the one of the ways I've done it, and I'm like, oh God, I have too many answers. One of the ways I've done it is to be very out as a sex worker, to try to just to be myself, right? So I'm, a PhD student, I'm a wife, I'm a dog owner, I haven't killed anybody, I'm a fairly law-abiding citizen, and I'm also a prostitute. And I think, but I have the privilege of being able to do that. Now, most people don't. So it's easy for me to say, oh, well, by being out, that's one way to overcome stigma. And I think that that's correct. However, easier said than done. Another way would be, I like when I see sex work in the media presented, maybe not even favorably, but the truth of what it is. So I think we need to get away, and activists need to get away from these extremes, right? It's the dichotomy of either happy hooker, oh, life is great and I make $1 million a year and I'm a high-end whatever. And then that's one end of it, and then we have the the crack whore, the street, and again, I have nothing against drug users and certainly not street workers, but these are just the dichotomies that we often see, and I think that that's problematic. So getting away from that, and also lastly, what I'm hoping to eventually do with my research, and as just being one person that's going to add one piece of it to the whole puzzle of data, is to conceptualize it as service labor. And I'm really from the school of thought that believes that sex work involves emotion labor, body labor, and that it really is a form of service. And so that's how I conceptualize it, and I think to see it as such is, I guess, the way to destigmatize it. Now, that all that being said, it's, I think we're on our way, but we still have so much to do, and the legislators and the laws are really, at the end of the day, for good or bad, the ones that are going to shape our lives, and we need to find a way as activists to have more weight with them, and to maybe collaborate a bit more, and to find the commonalities, for example, between the anti-trafficking groups, which I know we'll get into, and the sex worker right groups. There's not enough collaboration, and maybe there needs to be more.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that the only people, the first group, if I am an anti-trafficking volunteer, the people I'm going to go to first are the people who are voluntarily working in the sector. Because, first of all, they're going to know who's being exploited. They're going to know who's there, that's not against their will. And they're going to have, the desire to get these people out. I mean, if I'm working as a voluntary sex worker, I don't want to these people to be helped, and I know how to get to them. So the entire premise of the anti-human trafficking people trying to further stigmatize, trying to further hurt sex workers by promoting stricter laws, different laws, is really problematic to me. And to me kind of illustrates that it's really not about rescuing victims. It's about painting everyone in the industry as a victim. Mm-hmm. It's the white slavery panic, redone for modern times. What were your thoughts on the FBI sting, where it was, I think 130 underage human trafficking victims were supposedly rescued? We never hear their stories. We never hear about their working conditions. We never hear what rescue means. Mm-hmm. There's no better life for these women, outside of the situation without a lot of help. I know that there was a program in New York that if a woman was picked up for prostitution, then she had to go to these classes, mm-hmm. and it's not a rescue program. It's just kind of a further harassment. So, right. Were you able to dig in and get any more information on what's going on with the FBI raids?
Well, I read. I didn't get any more information than I'm sure is already out there. I read the article. I've been keeping up with it, and to me, it's just more of the same. It's no surprise, and it's rescue, a word I've really come to hate. And many of us, and when I say us, I don't want to speak for the community, but many sex workers will say, we need rights, not rescue. And as just an aside, I do, as part of a different research study, which has actually now come to its end, CSEC, the commercial sexual exploitation of children, which was, of course, done in New York City and John Jay, and has been done now in different cities. And I'm in Las Vegas, which I believe is the last leg of it. So I've been a research assistant and working as part of that. And what that has entailed is interviewing street workers, many of them underage, under 18. Now, these are, 16-year-olds who are consensually saying to me, and to us, many of us, we are, they might not use the word sex worker because, quite frankly, that's a bit of a privileged academic word. A lot of these girls and boys don't know that terminology, but they say, yes, I'm on the street selling sex. I don't have a pimp. Some have pimps, few, most don't. And they might be under the age of consent, but they are not victims. Now, they may be victims of child abuse at home. Why are they on the street? You have to think they're on the street because their home life is so bad, because there aren't enough resources to even sustain them, to keep them at home, to keep them in school. And so now they end up They are victims. They end up on the street, but they're not victims of trafficking. They're not victims of what the media is portraying them to be victims of. And now it's much easier to just arrest, because that's what they're doing. They're not rescuing, they're arresting these people. It's easier to arrest them, put them in the system, and that keeps the money going in the system. It's easier to do that and then to say, hey, look, we rescued all these kids. It's easier and more cost-effective to do that than to change the structural problems, such as the problems at school, the problems at home. They can't figure that out. That's too big of an undertaking. And so what they'd rather do is put a Band-Aid on it. And they're not, in my opinion, and from what I've seen, they're not rescuing anyone. They are arresting, whatever word you want to use, sex workers, prostitutes, whether they be 17, 18, 19, and they're putting them in the system. And they're either making them go to classes and telling them how shameful and awful prostitution is and how much it hurt them, or they're just, they're locking them up and they're throwing them back on the street. And it ends up being a revolving door. And so when I hear rescue, I just laugh and I think, oh, sure. And where are these kids and adults now? It's just a broken system. It's all broken.
It's broken from start to finish. I know what really kind of sealed the deal for me and broke my heart a little bit is that most of the kids, 16, 17, 18-year-olds that they picked up, no one was looking for.
Right.
This idea that kids are getting abducted from happy homes and sold into slavery, no, these are runaways, and this is how they're feeding themselves. And unless the DOJ has a way to feed them, you've just removed someone's ability to work for a while, and like you said, run them through the system and called it a rescue. And it's wrong from start to finish.
And if these, you have to think, and just in my very limited experience, interviewing, a handful of these victims, whatever you want to call them, prostitutes, sex workers on the street, if they're truly victims of what the DOJ would like to say they are, why are they avoiding the cops? These kids on the street are actively avoiding the cops. They're speaking to me, a researcher from UNLV. Wouldn't they say, help me, get me away from my pimp? No, because there is no pimp. They are runaways, and again, I'm generalizing. I don't want to speak for everybody, but I am generalizing and saying that I think a lot of these kids, young adults, whatever, are runaways. No one's looking for them. They're not going to the cops. It's actually a really sad state of affairs, and probably the last thing they want to do is turn tricks on the street for money. Who would want to do that? Not many people, right? But they're doing it because it's how they're surviving. It's survival sex. It's not trafficking. It's simply they're doing, just like if they were selling drugs, as some are, to get by. It's the same thing. And the way they're being rescued, and I put that in quotes for a reason, it's not doing anything beneficial to their lives or for their lives.
Absolutely. It would be wonderful if the truth were that evil people are abducting children and forcing them into slavery. And if we just find those people, and if we just find those evil people, and we put them in jail, and we rescue the victims, then all this will go away. And it's just not that simple. It would be wonderful if it were. That's a beautiful vision to sell to the public. It's simply not accurate.
It would be, it'd be very easy. If that were the problem, it would be very, very easy. It's like a movie. Go catch the bad guys and throw them in jail. But, of course, the bad guys here are probably just, adult men who want to purchase sex, and they're doing so. And now they're going to jail as, they're going to be sex offenders. They're going to be felons or traffickers or who knows. And, of course, I'm not saying that, and I feel like I always have to give the sex worker disclaimer, right, when we talk about these things. Like, okay, I don't like pimps, although some pimps aren't that bad. They're not all what you see in the movies. But, I don't like the idea of anybody being exploited and harmed. And of course I want all the traffickers and the bad guys in jail. It's just not the way it's being presented to us in the media is not the way it's working. And it goes right back to, it makes me think of the PGPD Vice, the stings. I don't know if you kept up with that. It was the same thing. It was, they were going to live tweet these prostitution stings, and that was somehow going to be a I don't know, something good for the community. I thought, how could this be good for any community? How could anyone think that this is a good idea? But somebody does. Lots of people do, actually. So
that's crazy. Well, speaking of stories that were not real but made for good movies, tell us about what happened with Chong Kim.
Well, with Chong Kim, she was someone that I took an interest to because I actually saw her speak live at UNLV, and it was back in, I think, late February, I think it was. Around that time, she came and actually spoke at the university where I'm a student, and it was put on by a local anti-trafficking organization, Bamboo Bridges, who actually, the founder is a professor of social work at UNLV. So the social work department put on and teamed up with Bamboo Bridges and put on this whole evening of, film screening of Eden, and then Chong Kim spoke. And so, it was free, so I went. Like, of course, it was free. I might have not paid to go, but, I'm always kind of leery of these anti-trafficking events. But I said, well, it's local, and like I said, I always think that the sex worker groups should team up with the anti-trafficking groups if there are any honorable, honest ones out there. So I said, well, let me check this out. It's worth going to. Saw the film, seemed incredibly sensationalized, but I figured it probably was for Hollywood. I heard her speak. Honestly, it didn't feel right, but what do I know? I'm thinking I could just be paranoid and tired of these stories. Maybe this really did happen to this woman. So I went home and I Googled the case, because I know, according to Chong Kim, she said, dozens, maybe hundreds of other girls and victims, and this was this huge case. So I go online to look, well, where are the arrests, the prosecutions, where are the details? I want to read all about this, and I find nothing, not a single thing. Everything that I can find just keeps going back to her website. I think, well, this is strange. Now, this was back in late February, and who's going to listen to me? Whatever. So I lose interest, and that's it. Time passes. Then, Breaking Out, the nonprofit organization who had worked with Chong Kim, comes out, I don't know, a month ago or so, maybe more, and says, hey, she's a fraud. We have proof. The whole thing starts to blow up. So I wrote a couple articles about it, and I interviewed James Barnes, who's the president and founder of Breaking Out, and I interviewed him about his work with Chong Kim, and why are they having these allegations of fraud, and that interview's online. But it seems now like she was convicted of and pleaded guilty to swindle of over $15,000 from an actual trafficking victim in Japan, and now all her court documents, she's still on probation for it. And I believe that James Barnes did speak to her probation officer. And it just turns out that a lot of the details, they did a background check. None of them matched. None of them checked through. And her story is just falling apart bit by bit. She seems to be silent on the matter. And it's at the point now where it kind of just seems to be at the standstill. No one's really talking. And Bamboo Bridges, who I've tried to put some heat on, for comment, at the very least, since they did sponsor the event and they sponsored a fundraiser for Chong Kim the next day, has said nothing. Chong Kim has said nothing except for all these lies, these people are attacking me, I will rise above this, and Breaking Out has just continued to supply information and to say that the latest I've heard is that Chong Kim's lawyers have contacted Breaking Out, and so they are continuing their investigation a bit more a bit quieter, I guess. But as far as I know, it seems to be turning out that she is a fraud, and much like Somali Mom, and we just saw this happen. But for whatever reason, people are the lid has not been completely blown off it yet, and I'm really just dying for that to happen, because I've had enough of these frauds taking money and attention and time away from real victims of trafficking that do exist out there, and instead are making money off of the backs of arrested sex workers, and it's just not okay. And I don't know how it's going to stop, but it has to stop happening, because it's completely vile. It's vile and it's dishonest.
It is, absolutely. And I'm glad that you wrote about it. I'm glad that Mr. Whiteacre is publishing you about this, and that James is speaking out about it as well. I know I wrote a little piece about it for media. It got a lot of really good, traction. I think we're coming to an interesting time. I don't want to oversimplify, but it seems like Twitter and social media generally is just given voice to a group, along with changing social mores, giving voice to a group, to sex workers as a lobby, to kind of humanize it, like you said. And I really feel like the human trafficking scare, though it's being used for really, really nefarious purposes, as we've seen, to personally enrich some fraudsters and to push for a criminalization agenda, I almost feel like it's going to backfire on them, because you've got sex workers like you and like others taking this opportunity to take this national attention and flip the narrative and say, these people, they've not lived my life, they don't know what's going on the ground, this is the truth of the situation. So I'm excited. I think there's a lot of work to be done.
And I agree, and I think it's unbelievable the impact that especially Twitter has had. And we call it sex work Twitter, and people will even hashtag things and write sex work Twitter to get it out there to whoever is a part of this, this illustrious group of us. But I love it. I think it's great. It's great. As soon as I get a story or I write one, I can go on Twitter and I can send it directly to my couple thousand followers, and I can tag certain sex workers in it that have a bigger following, and it just spreads, and it's wonderful. And I think there are so many of us. We do exist, real people such as myself, that are selling sexual services for money, and we should be listened to, rather than those who choose to either speak for us or about us or sensationalize our stories, all for the purposes of making a buck.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
So
and I do want to say, I was going to say, the only last thing I want to say was, because this is, I think, very important, one doesn't need to be, and because this causes a lot of fights, especially on Twitter, I don't think one needs to be a sex worker to talk about sex work. I mean, I have no idea what your background is. I don't know if you ever were, but for my purposes, I don't think you've been a sex worker, and you talk and you write about it. And people get touchy about that, but I think there's a way to do it, and some people do it exceptionally well without having been sex workers. And it's like my husband, Mr. Whiteacre, always says, you don't have to be, what does he say? You don't have to be Copernicus to study the sun or whatever it is. And I think that's true. But there's a certain grace in speaking about it, and in including sex workers' voices, as you have done and as you're doing now. And so I just want to thank you for that, for giving real sex workers airtime.
Well, I appreciate you taking the opportunity. I think your voice is invaluable, and I appreciate as well that you're okay with making space also for people who maybe don't have the experience but do, for whatever reason, have a platform. I think we need, to work together like we're doing. So where can people find your writing, your work, your videos? How should people get in touch with you?
So the best way is if they look on my Twitter, my email is actually on there, my personal email, and I'm always happy to respond to emails. My Twitter is Sin City girl, but it's spelled obnoxiously, of course. So SIN, sin, city, no spaces, GRRRL. So Sin City Girl. That's me on Twitter. And then Christina Parreira at yahoo.com. My email is written in my header. I used to have my own blog and site, but mostly right now I'm writing for my husband, Michael Whiteacre's site, which is trpwl.com. I have quite a bit of, I have a few pieces on there now about sex work and these dichotomies of empowerment and all this, and work in the brothel. So I would say between my Twitter and trpwl.com, those are probably the best ways to reach me and to see my work.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Christina, for coming on, and thank you all for watching. Keep in touch for more videos, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Please like, comment, subscribe. See you guys later.